The bus hissed to a stop. The sound of its air breaks a long sigh of relief in the otherwise silent afternoon. Jack Reacher stepped down onto the immaculate pavement of Redemption, Nebraska. He hadn't planned to stop here. He never planned to stop anywhere. He just rode the bus until he felt like getting off, and for some reason, the name Redemption on the route map had snagged his attention. Now, standing on the corner of a street so clean it looked like a movie set, he was starting to regret it. The town was perfect. Too perfect. Lawns were manicured with military precision, white picket fences gleamed under the hazy sun, and not a single piece of litter marred the sidewalks. People nodded as they passed, their smiles polite but their eyes vacant, sliding away too quickly. It was the kind of quiet that wasn't peaceful. It was the quiet of a held breath. Reacher needed coffee. He spotted a diner on the far side of the town square, a chrome and red leather relic called the Daily Grind. He pushed through the door, a small bell announcing his arrival. Every head in the place turned to look at him. The conversations didn't stop, but they faltered, the rhythm disrupted by his presence. He took a seat at the counter, the worn vinyl cool against his back. A waitress with a tired face and a name tag that read Brenda approached. "What can I get for you, stranger?" "Coffee," Reacher said. "Black." She poured it without another word. The coffee was strong and bitter, just the way he liked it. As he drank, he listened. The low murmur of conversation was mostly about crops, the weather, and local high school sports. But underneath it, there was a current of something else. Fear. He could feel it in the way people avoided certain topics, in the way their gazes darted towards the door every time the bell chimed. Then, the bell chimed and two men walked in. They were big, but soft in the way of bullies who rarely met resistance. They wore matching jackets for a local construction company, Caldwell Construction. They scanned the room, their eyes landing on a young man sitting alone in a booth, nervously nursing a soda. "Well, look what we got here," the first man said, his voice loud enough to carry through the diner. "If it ain't little Mikey." The young man, Mikey, shrank into his seat. "Leave me alone, Hank." "Leave you alone?" The second man, a bruiser named Carl, laughed. "Your dad should have thought about that before he started asking questions where they weren't wanted. Now you're going to finish that soda and get out of our town." Mikey trembled but didn't move. Hank reached out and grabbed the front of his shirt, hauling him halfway out of the booth. "You deaf, kid?" No one in the diner moved. Brenda the waitress looked down, polishing a clean spot on the counter. The other patrons suddenly found their plates of food fascinating. Reacher took another sip of his coffee. He wasn't a hero. He didn't look for trouble, but he hated bullies. He hated the imbalance of power, the casual cruelty of the strong preying on the weak. He put his mug down with a deliberate, soft click that somehow cut through the tension. "He said to leave him alone," Reacher said, his voice calm and low, not even turning his head. Hank and Carl turned to face him. "Who the hell are you?" Hank sneered. "The guy who's drinking his coffee," Reacher said, "and you're interrupting." Carl chuckled. "You got a death wish, pal?" He started to walk towards Reacher. He was big, maybe 6'3", 250 pounds of muscle gone to seed. Reacher didn't move from his stool. He calculated the distance, the angles. Carl swung a clumsy, telegraphed right hook. Reacher leaned back just enough for the fist to whistle past his face. Before Carl could recover, Reacher shot a hand out, not a punch, but an open palm strike, the heel of his hand connecting solidly with Carl's nose. There was a sickening crunch of cartilage and bone. Carl screamed, staggering back, hands flying to his face as blood poured between his fingers. Hank stared, frozen for a second in disbelief. That was his mistake. Reacher slid off the stool, closing the distance in a single step. An elbow to Hank's solar plexus drove the air from his lungs in a choked gasp. As Hank doubled over, Reacher brought a knee up into his face. The second bully collapsed onto the checkered linoleum floor, unconscious before he even landed. The diner was utterly silent now. Mikey was staring, wide-eyed. Brenda the waitress had her hand over her mouth. Reacher looked at her. "Check, please." Before she could move, the door opened again. This time it was the law. Two deputies stood in the doorway, hands on their holstered sidearms. Behind them was a taller man, impeccably dressed in a sheriff's uniform that looked like it had been tailored. He had silver hair and a smile that was all teeth. "Well now," the sheriff said, his voice smooth as honey. "Looks like we have a little disturbance of the peace. I'm Sheriff Brody, and you are?" "Passing through," Reacher said. He gestured to the two men on the floor. "They were assaulting that kid." Sheriff Brody's smile didn't waver. He barely glanced at his groaning men. "I'm sure it was just a misunderstanding. Here in Redemption, we like to keep things friendly. You, however, you're not from around here, and you just put two of our citizens on the floor. That's a problem." "They started it," Reacher stated flatly. "Doesn't matter who started it, son. It matters who finishes it. And in my town, I do." Brody nodded to his deputies. "Cuff him." The deputies hesitated, looking at Reacher's size, then at their bleeding colleagues on the floor. Brody's voice hardened. "Now." Reacher didn't resist. He knew how this worked. He let them cuff him, the cold steel clicking shut around his wrists. As they led him out of the diner, he caught the eye of the kid, Mikey. The boy looked terrified, but in his eyes, Reacher saw a tiny spark of something else. Gratitude. It was a complication he didn't need. The jail cell was small, cold, and smelled of disinfectant and despair. Reacher sat on the thin mattress of the cot, feeling the internal clock in his head ticking away. He'd been here for 3 hours. No questions, no processing, just the silence of the station house. It was a classic intimidation tactic. Leave the guy alone with his thoughts, let him stew, make him nervous. It wouldn't work on Reacher. Finally, the door opened. Sheriff Brody entered, holding a file. He sat down on a chair opposite the bars. "Jack Reacher," he said, reading from the file. "No middle name, no fixed address, ex-military police, a ghost." "You've been busy," Reacher said. "It's my job to know who's in my town, especially when they start breaking noses. The Caldwells are not happy with you, Reacher. They own the biggest business in this county. They practically built this town. Their employees are their family." "Some family," Reacher grunted. "Your boys in the diner, Hank and Carl, they work for Caldwell Construction." "They do," Brody said. "Good, hardworking boys who made a mistake. A mistake you escalated into assault." "Tell me about Mikey's dad," Reacher said, changing the subject. "The kid Hank and Carl were harassing. What questions was he asking?" Brody's smile tightened. "Mr. Peterson was a troubled man. He had an unfortunate accident out at the old quarry a few months back. Tragic." "How many tragic accidents do you have in Redemption, Sheriff?" The sheriff's facade cracked for a second. A flicker of cold anger showed in his eyes. "You're a drifter, Reacher. You blew into town and caused trouble. The smart thing for you to do right now is accept a disorderly conduct charge, pay a small fine, and get on the next bus out of here. The smart thing is to forget you ever saw Redemption." "And the dumb thing?" Reacher asked. "The dumb thing," Brody said, standing up, "is to keep asking questions in a town that doesn't have any answers for you." He turned and left, the cell door clanging shut behind him. Later that night, a deputy unlocked the cell. "You're free to go. Someone paid your fine." Reacher walked out into the cool night air. The streets of Redemption were deserted. He stood on the courthouse steps, wondering who would have paid his fine. Then he saw her, standing in the shadows of a nearby oak tree. She was a woman in her late 30s, with a tense, worried expression. She clutched a purse to her chest like a shield. "You're Jack Reacher?" she asked, her voice a nervous whisper. "I am. I'm Sarah Peterson, Mikey's aunt. I paid your fine. I had to thank you for what you did for him." "It was nothing." "It wasn't nothing," she insisted, stepping closer. "No one has stood up to the Caldwells or their people in years. Not since my brother. Not since David died." David, Mikey's father, the man who had an unfortunate accident. "The sheriff told me your brother was troubled," Reacher said, watching her reaction. Her eyes flashed with anger. David wasn't troubled. He was a reporter for the local paper. He was meticulous. He was brave. He was investigating the Caldwell meatpacking plant. He thought they were cutting corners, violating safety regulations, maybe worse. He told me he was close to a breakthrough. The next day, his car was found at the bottom of the quarry. And the police report said he'd been drinking, lost control of the car. But David never drank, not a drop. Her voice cracked. They murdered him, Mr. Reacher. I know they did, and they run this town, the sheriff included. Everyone's too scared to say anything. Reacher looked at the perfectly manicured town square, at the darkened windows of the neat little houses. He saw it now, not as a peaceful town, but as a gilded cage. He had a choice. He could walk to the bus station, get on the next bus, and leave this all behind. It wasn't his fight. It wasn't his town. But then he thought of the fear in Mikey's eyes, the quiet desperation in Sarah's voice, and the smug confidence on Sheriff Brody's face. "Where did your brother keep his notes?" Reacher asked. Sarah's house was small and cluttered with books and papers. She led Reacher to a locked study in the back. David kept everything in here. After he died, the sheriff's office did a search. They said they were looking for a note, but I think they were looking for his work. They took his computer and some files, but I don't think they found everything. She pulled a loose floorboard from under the desk, revealing a small, hidden compartment. Inside was a single leather-bound journal. He always kept a private journal, she said, her hands shaking as she handed it to Reacher. He wrote in some kind of code he made up when we were kids. Reacher spent the next few hours deciphering the journal. It wasn't a complex code, more of a shorthand mixed with personal symbols, but the story it told was damning. David Peterson had been tracking shipping manifests from the Caldwell plant. Official records showed a certain number of cattle going in and a corresponding amount of processed meat coming out. But David had found a secondary, unofficial set of logs. These logs showed trucks arriving at the plant late at night, carrying not livestock but large, sealed chemical drums. They left empty before sunrise. The trucks were untraceable, their plates always changing. David had hypothesized that the plant was a front for a massive illegal dumping operation. The Caldwells were being paid millions to dispose of toxic waste from unscrupulous corporations, burying it somewhere out on their vast land holdings and contaminating the local water table. The accidents were the price of silence for anyone who got too close to the truth. He was right, Reacher said, closing the journal. This is bigger than safety violations. It's a federal crime, multiple federal crimes. What can we do? Sarah asked, her face pale. Brody will never let this see the light of day. We don't go to Brody, Reacher said. We go over his head. But first, we need proof. Something more than a coded journal. The plan was simple, which meant it was incredibly dangerous. Reacher needed to get inside the Caldwell plant at night and get a sample of whatever was in those drums. Sarah knew the plant's layout from her brother's notes. There was a weak spot in the perimeter fence on the north side near a drainage culvert. That night, under the cover of a moonless sky, Reacher moved through the darkness like a wraith. He found the weak spot in the fence exactly where Sarah said it would be. He slipped through and made his way towards the massive, silent structure of the plant. The air hung heavy with the coppery smell of blood and the sharp, acrid tang of chemicals. He found a loading bay door that was unlocked, a sign of arrogance. The Caldwells didn't think anyone would dare. He moved silently through the cavernous, refrigerated halls, past hooks hanging from the ceiling like metallic skeletons. The place was a maze of stainless steel and white tile. He found what he was looking for in a locked section of the warehouse marked sanitation supplies. He picked the cheap lock in seconds. Inside, stacked high on pallets, were dozens of the 55-gallon drums David had described in his journal. They were unmarked, save for a series of stenciled serial numbers. Reacher found a toolkit, unscrewed the bung on one of the drums, and used a small vial he'd brought to collect a sample of the viscous, foul-smelling liquid inside. He was just sealing the vial when he heard the sound of footsteps. 2 of them. He flattened himself into the shadows between two stacks of drums. Two security guards, employees of the plant, not deputies, walked past, their flashlights cutting lazy arcs through the darkness. "You hear something?" one of them asked. "Probably just rats," the other replied. "Place is full of them, two-legged and four-legged." They laughed and moved on. Reacher waited until their footsteps faded, then slipped back out the way he came. He met Sarah at a prearranged spot a mile from the plant. He handed her the vial. "Get this to a friend of yours, someone you trust, out of state. Have them get it to the EPA and the FBI. Use a courier. Don't do it yourself. They'll be watching you." "What are you going to do?" she asked, her eyes full of concern. "I'm going to make sure they're too busy to notice the package is gone," Reacher said. His face was grim. "They're not going to just let this go. They know someone was inside. They're going to come looking for me. I'm counting on it." He was right. The next day, the town of Redemption felt different. The tension was no longer a subtle undercurrent. It was a palpable, suffocating blanket. Sheriff Brody's cars were everywhere, cruising the streets slowly. Men who didn't look like locals were suddenly sitting in the diner, their eyes scanning everyone who came and went. The Caldwells were hunting him. Reacher didn't hide. That wasn't his style. He made himself visible. He walked down the main street, bought a new shirt at the general store, and sat on a park bench in the town square, eating an apple. He was the bait, and he wanted them to bite. They took the bait just after dusk. Reacher was walking down a quiet residential street when a black SUV without license plates screeched to a halt beside him. 4 men jumped out. These weren't local thugs like Hank and Carl. These were professionals. They moved with a disciplined economy of motion. They were here to do a job, not to posture. Reacher didn't wait for them to surround him. He exploded into motion, charging the first man. He drove the heel of his boot into the man's kneecap, shattering it. The man screamed and went down. Reacher used the man's falling body as a shield as the second man swung a metal baton. The baton connected with the first man's shoulder with a sickening thud. Reacher ducked under the swing and drove his elbow into the second man's throat, crushing his windpipe. The third and fourth men came at him from either side. Reacher spun, blocking a punch from the third man and redirecting the man's momentum, sending him stumbling into the fourth. They collided in a tangle of limbs. It gave Reacher the opening he needed. A quick, brutal combination of strikes, a palm to the nose of one, a roundhouse kick to the ribs of the other, and it was over. The entire fight had lasted less than 10 seconds. He left them groaning on the sidewalk and walked away. It was a message. To Brody. To the Caldwells. You sent your best. It wasn't enough. The next move had to be his. He couldn't wait for them to regroup and send more men. He had to end it. He had to go to the source. He needed to isolate Sheriff Brody. He found him late that night at the sheriff's station. Brody was alone, working late. The deputies were out, no doubt part of the dragnet searching for Reacher. Reacher didn't bother with the door. He went around the back and broke a window, the sound of shattering glass startlingly loud in the quiet night. Brody was on his feet in an instant, his gun drawn. "Reacher, I knew you'd be stupid enough to come here." "Not stupid," Reacher said, stepping through the broken window into the office, glass crunching under his boots. "Just finished." "You're finished," Brody snarled, aiming his weapon. "You're trespassing. I can shoot you right here and it'll be perfectly legal." "And the toxic waste dumping? Is that legal too?" Reacher asked, taking a slow step forward. Brody's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The EPA and the FBI will soon enough. A sample from one of your barrels is already on its way to them. Sarah Peterson sent it. It's over, Brody." Brody's face contorted with rage. "It's over when I say it's over." He fired. The roar of the gun was deafening in the small office, but Reacher wasn't there. He had anticipated the shot, diving to the side, rolling behind a heavy oak desk. Another shot splintered the wood near his head. Reacher came up on the other side of the desk. Brody was fumbling to aim again. Reacher lunged, covering the 10 feet between them in a heartbeat. He slammed the sheriff's gun hand against the wall. The weapon clattered to the floor. Brody was strong, wiry, and desperate. He fought back with a feral intensity. They crashed against the wall, overturning a filing cabinet. Papers scattered across the floor. But desperation was no match for technique. Reacher absorbed a punch to the jaw and responded with a short, precise jab to Brody's kidney. The sheriff grunted in pain. Reacher spun him around, locking him in a chokehold. "It's over," Reacher repeated, his voice a low growl in Brody's ear, squeezing just enough to cut off the air. Brody struggled for a few seconds, his hands clawing at Reacher's arm, before going limp. Reacher let him slump to the floor, unconscious. He used Brody's own handcuffs to secure him to a radiator pipe. One down, one to go. The Caldwell estate was on a hill overlooking the town, a monument to greed and power. Reacher approached it on foot, moving through the woods that bordered the property. Lights were on in the main house. Elias Caldwell, the patriarch of the family, would be waiting. He would have been warned by the silence from Brody's team. The house was a fortress, but Reacher wasn't interested in the house. He was interested in the man. He found a phone line, shimmied up the pole, and cut it. Then he found the main circuit breaker for the property and killed the power. The entire estate was plunged into darkness. Panic was a powerful weapon. He heard shouting from the house. Men with flashlights fanned out onto the lawn. Reacher picked them off one by one in the darkness, using the terrain to his advantage. He was a ghost, a whisper of violence in the night. A quick takedown here, a silent chokehold there. He dismantled Caldwell's private army without a sound. Finally, he entered the darkened house. He found Elias Caldwell in his study, sitting behind a massive desk, a heavy shotgun resting across his lap. A single emergency candle flickered on the desk, casting long, dancing shadows. "I should have known they couldn't handle you," Caldwell said, his voice calm, betraying no fear. He was an old man, but his eyes were hard as granite. "You're a force of nature, aren't you, Mr. Reacher?" "You're a poison," Reacher replied, standing in the doorway, a silhouette against the darkness. "You poisoned this town, its water, and its people." "I gave this town prosperity," Caldwell boomed. "I gave these people jobs. A little industrial waste is a small price to pay for the lives they have. They were happy until you and that reporter's brat started digging. They were scared. There's a difference." Caldwell raised the shotgun. "It doesn't matter now. The feds might be coming, but they won't get here in time to save you. I'll tell them you broke into my home, and I defended myself. In redemption, my word is law." "Not anymore," Reacher said. He moved just as Caldwell pulled the triggers. The double-barreled shotgun blast tore a huge hole in the wall where Reacher had been standing. The sound was apocalyptic. Before Caldwell could reload, Reacher was on him. He wrenched the shotgun from the old man's hands and snapped it in half over his knee. Caldwell stared at the broken weapon, then at Reacher, a flicker of true fear finally entering his eyes. "What are you going to do?" Reacher looked at the terrified old man, the architect of so much pain and corruption. It would be easy to end him, justified even, but that wasn't his way. "I'm going to let you live," Reacher said quietly. "You're going to live to see everything you built turn to dust. You're going to face federal charges. You're going to watch your name become a curse in this town. Your punishment isn't death, it's living with the consequences." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. The federal cavalry was arriving, just as planned. Reacher turned and walked out of the study, leaving Elias Caldwell to his fate. He didn't stick around. He slipped out the back of the estate and walked through the woods, circling back towards the highway on the edge of town. By the time the sun came up, Redemption was swarming with FBI agents and EPA officials in hazmat suits. The reign of the Caldwells was over. He saw Sarah one last time. She was standing near the bus station watching the sunrise. She saw him and smiled, a real genuine smile this time. "It's over," she said. "They arrested everyone. Caldwell, his sons, what's left of Brody's department. Thank you." "You did the hard part," Reacher said. "You and your brother. You had the courage to ask questions." "Will you stay?" she asked, a hopeful note in her voice. Reacher shook his head. "Not my style. I've got a bus to catch." He bought a ticket for the first bus heading east, destination unknown. As he boarded, he looked back at the town of Redemption. It was still pristine, still perfect on the surface. But now, the quiet felt different. It was no longer the quiet of fear. It was the quiet of a new beginning. The bus pulled away from the curb, and Jack Reacher didn't look back. He had no home, no destination. He just had the road ahead, and that was all he ever needed.